some PowerPoints just to make sure that we had some structure, but I don't have to go over the PowerPoints, and I don't always use PowerPoints. I just keep them there for safety reasons, in case I need them. Once again, the art of doing research, the title, very, very important, and you will hear in my remarks throughout the day an interpretation of the way I see research that's probably different than the interpretation of research as you learn it here in Vietnam. You notice I say a conversation with, because I really do not want to talk to you all day. You would all be falling asleep. I would be falling asleep and couldn't speak. So I want to have a conversation with you, to talk with you, all right? And I know that it takes some time. Vietnamese audiences are that way. I've been around a long time in Vietnam, so I think of myself as a Vietnamese, except I can't speak the language. Inside, though, I'm very Vietnamese, only on the outside. This is a conversation with me. Originally, I'm from California, in the States, way down south. You see where it says Fullerton. That's my home campus. I was a professor since 1970, over 40 years, professor and administrator at Fullerton. We have about 38,000, 39,000 students. About 2,000 every year are Vietnamese students because we are very close to Little Saigon. So they are Viet Kieu. You will see we are not predominantly white. We are an urban campus, maybe something like Can Tho, in that we're built in the middle of a city on a fairly small amount of land, but we use the land very economically so we can house everything that we need to have. The configuration of an American university is very much like the configurations that you imagine here. It has the kinds of buildings, the kinds of laboratories, the kinds of physical ed kinds of things that make for a comprehensive institution. An institution that speaks to all of the needs of the student, not just the classroom academic needs, but all of the needs of the student. And I think it's one of the big distinguishing characteristics between the Western system and the Asian systems, is that in the Western system we tend to pay more attention to the full development of the student. And in the Asian systems, they pay more attention to the academic development of the student. About my little thing. You can see 38,325 students in the fall, last fall. 56% are female. We've had over 200,000 graduates already as of 2014, and we have a lot of international students, over 1,000 from 81 different nations, because we recruit international students because we believe that fundamental to a university education is the exposure to lots of cultures and lots of different perspectives. And so since the American student is very parochial and doesn't often go abroad, doesn't often leave their nest and think that the whole world is America, we want to bring international students into our classrooms so that those students have a chance to meet them, interact with them, and discover that there are other places in the world than Fullerton, California. And so we have maybe approaching 2,000. I haven't looked lately how many are there. Over the years, of course, we all start as assistant professors. I started back in 1970. You weren't even born. Anybody born? No, no one. No one in the room. Not even you, I bet. 1970. long time ago, huh? Assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. And you know, in the Western system, we cannot get promoted without research. We cannot get promoted without publication. We cannot keep our jobs without research and publications. If we do not do research and we do not publish, we have 7 years. And at the end of the 7 years, we are dismissed. We are not granted tenure. Only people who are active. And it's not the matter, you know, they don't do research to discover the answer to life or discover the biggest thing in the world. They simply do research. They engage in their professions, whether they be language teachers or whether they be chemists or physicists. They engage in their professional activity to continue to explore the creation of knowledge through the process of doing research. And so we require that of all of the people who teach in a Western campus, all of the people who teach in all of the fields. I went on to become a research center director and founder, the Center for Demographic Research. Back in those days, I was bringing in maybe $500,000 a year in grants, supporting about 30 students who were working for us doing research, which is, you know, a model that Cantor has to evolve in that the university begins to produce research sources and then creates a program whereby faculty and students are involved in those projects, because the way you teach people to do research is by having them do research. You don't teach very well in the classroom. You can only do so much. It is only so effective until you put it to work, apply it. I was the Associate Dean of the Humanities and Social Science, went on to become Associate Vice President for the whole university, Dean of Graduate Studies, and then when I get old, I retire. They grant me the honorary status of Professor Emeritus, which means I gave them my life, and this is what I get. So from now on, I get free parking on campus. For 40 years, I paid for parking. But when you get old and retire, they give you free parking on campus. That's it. Can you tell my jokes? You can't, right? You will. You will. All right. I was trained at USC, University of Southern California in Los Angeles. My specializations were social sciences, research methods, and statistics. Director of Social Science Research Center, founder and associate director of the Center for Demographic Studies, more than 50 funded research projects over my career, several years raising $500,000 or more, getting awards. What is today about? To teach you something if I can, whatever I can share. But you don't learn how to do research in one day. You simply don't, you know. But I want to share my experiences and share my perspective and try to encourage you to look at research more seriously and to try to convince you that research is not so difficult, not so hard, nothing to be scared of. It is an easy kind of process. You simply need to jump in the water and begin to swim. All right? And then over time, you will get better and better, and it will be easier and easier. I want to hold a discussion with you to answer questions that you might have about my experiences. I want to encourage and motivate you to make research a part of your own lives, jobs, institutions. In other words, I believe that research is more than just becoming a professor or getting promoted. Research has to do with being a good citizen. Research has to do with a lot of things, all right? And so I want you to think about the roles that your knowledge of research might play in Vietnam and in your lives. And to try to convince you that research and statistics are not difficult skills. I know that the general teacher, the general research and stat teacher, tries to impress you about how much they know and make it so difficult, because they think in making it difficult, you will be impressed by them. But it's the wrong approach. I have been teaching statistics and research my whole life. My whole life. And I try to do exactly the opposite. I try to relax students, to reduce the math anxiety, to reduce the stress, and then they become very productive, engaged students. Everybody can learn. These things are simple. They're simpler than most of your fields, believe me. They are only made difficult by the people who handle you in the classroom. Perhaps the most important way of knowing the world. Okay, so this is about why I believe research is important, you know. Of course it's important at the university. It's important as part of your careers and part of the university becoming a credible, good institution. The reason why the Hong Kong institutions end up on the high rankings every year is because they buy professors with long lists of publications and they give them lots of money to do research. Are they good teachers? Not necessarily. Are those institutions good at educating their students? Not necessarily. But they do end up with high rankings because they buy the rankings through this other process. Well, that's one use of it, the use of research as part of your university obligation and things. But of course, in your fields, you need the research, because the research is where we discover new knowledge. We learn about new things. But, you know, we're not talking about research in that all of you are going to become Einsteins or the great researchers of tomorrow. We want you to be good digesters as well. We want you to be able to read articles and to make decisions about whether that research was a good piece of research or maybe not so good piece of research. In other words, we want you to be good about assessing the nature of research and how dramatic it is itself. So we don't expect everybody to become good researchers. We shouldn't expect that. That's one of the fallacies. That was one of the fallacies in the Western system. We didn't appreciate people who came to work for the university and were just good teachers. So we had to devise standards whereby everybody did a certain amount of research, but that those who were good teachers got credit for teaching well, and those who were good researchers got credit for doing research well. We need some flexibility. We need all kinds of people to make an institution. We even need administrators, huh? Sometimes. It provides the means of getting consensus about critical issues, you know. And this is where, not only in your fields, but as the world and in the nation as well, you know, there are issues that have to be faced, policies that have to be made. And one of the reasons all of us, as a group of people, are able to get together and say, yes, this is what we ought to do, is because we see evidence. Now, it doesn't always work. I used to have this big lecture on smoking and disease. Millions and millions of dollars. Thousands and thousands of pieces of research about the relationship between smoking and health. And yet, at the end of all of that, there were still people who said, no, cigarettes are not the problem. People are the problem. We've got the same problem in America today. We have all of this research about violence and mortality of youth as a result of guns. And all of these pieces of research, and yet you still have lots of people who say, no, it's not the guns, it's the people that kill people. Climate change. The same thing. If you look at the research that's gone into documenting and producing the evidence concerning climate change, it's enormous, overwhelming. To those of us who really know research well, we read that and we cannot form any other conclusion, but we've got a problem. But for people who are invested in the system, for people who stand to lose money Because of that conclusion, they will not believe that climate change is happening, and they will not believe we need to address the problem today. All right? So research is not black and white. And I hope when you leave today, if you learn nothing else from me, is that research follows on a continuum of the degree of which we are convinced by the evidence that's produced, and it also falls on a continuum based on beliefs, politics, policy, economics, all kinds of things influence the way we finally evaluate and judge the results of research. And so we want to talk about that. It's also a way, I'm really convinced, and I do a lot of teacher training. And when I was at the university, I hired lots and lots of faculty, both as department chair and as associate vice president, dean of graduate studies. I can tell when I talk to a person whether they understand science or not. In an interview, I can discern the difference between people who have appreciation for the nature of science and people who just simply are confused by it. It makes a difference in the way you think. And when you walk in the classroom and you teach, maybe not so much in the languages, but in physics or in chemistry or in biology, students understand when teachers really know what they're talking about and when teachers don't know what they're talking about. So as faculty members, it is incumbent upon all of us to have that sense of understanding science, the nature of science, the interpretation of science. One of my very favorite stories when I do teacher training. I graduated, I was doing my PhD. I started my PhD in 1968. Finished my PhD in 1974. Before I finished my PhD, I had already been teaching full-time for 2 years. And I had a 3-year big, gigantic research project that I completed and finished off. So lots of experience, and that experience was really helpful to me in my career. But when I graduated, there were no cell phones. There was no computer, no laptops, no Microsoft, no projectors, no PowerPoint. You understand? When I graduated, we had less than what Vietnam has today.
Really?
We had blackboards and chalk.
We too.
And maybe if we were lucky, we had these old clunker calculators with all of these keys on them. And that was our statistics lab. That's all we had. And then now you look at me 40 years later. About 10 years ago, I started teaching almost all online. I'm a pretty good master of SPSS and all the research tools and techniques. But how? You see, you have to keep up. If you cannot keep up with your lives, if you cannot keep up with your professions, you're going to be lost. And we all know them. I knew them when I was a department chair. I had faculty who were working for me. At our university, we gave everyone a brand new computer every 3 years. Every faculty member got a brand new computer every 3 years. Every faculty member gets a brand new laptop every 4 years. And I have faculty back there who never touched those machines. They were still using the notes they used 30 years before. Still using the same book they had used 30 years before. Students knew it. And the amount of learning that was happening was a shame. Very little we could do, we have tenure in the Western, we try our best, but at a certain point, you can only do so much to encourage faculty to keep up with this stuff. But I encourage you, I encourage all of you to think about research as a means by which you can keep yourself up in the field, okay, in your fields. So that's another purpose. Skills are a must-have in order for a good lifelong learning. So it's not only your lifelong learning, but think about it for your students. You know, once again, one of the big differences between the Asian system and the Western system is our focus on lifelong learning skills. Those other skills that are not necessarily needed for the academic performance in the classroom at that particular point in time, but that are needed after they graduate to get jobs and to adapt to those jobs and to adapt to the changes that happen in those jobs. And an appreciation of research and research skills is one of those things that make your students stronger, make your students more competitive in the market. They can go out, they can get a job, and they can survive over time, changing as the job changes, because all their jobs will change. Oh, it's a little bit slower in Vietnam, but it's going to happen. The more Vietnam develops, the faster jobs are going to change. The nature of those jobs are going to change. It's already happening. And you have to train your students to be able to compete in that kind of world. It is a way of thinking, a set of life skills, blah, blah, blah. See, I'm already talking too much, huh? Am I talking too fast? Someone want to talk to me? I'm tired.